The forbidden betrayal, my husband's darkest secret. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to find out their secret could tear your world apart? What if that secret was something so taboo, so unimaginable, that it didn't just break your heart, it shattered your very sense of reality? This is the story of my husband's darkest betrayal. It's not just a story of love and loss, it's about discovering the strength to face the unthinkable. They say the greatest pain doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the people you hold closest to your heart. For me, that pain came from my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. The last 24 hours have been nothing short of a nightmare for me. My emotions are in shambles, and I feel like I'm drowning. Let me take you back to where it all began. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. 3 years ago, we agreed to open our relationship. We're both bisexual, and we wanted to give each other the freedom to explore those sides of ourselves, me with women, and him with men. It wasn't an easy decision, but it worked for us. We had one golden rule: transparency. We promised to tell each other about every encounter. That was our foundation, honesty, no matter what. A week ago, I traveled several hours to care for my sick mother. My husband stayed behind to work from home. The plan was for me to return after a few days, but when my mom started feeling better, I decided to surprise him by coming home early. I couldn't wait to see him. As I pulled into the driveway, the house looked quiet. I entered with a smile, expecting to find him in his office. Instead, faint sounds reached my ears. Romantic, intimate sounds. My heart sank. He hadn't told me he was seeing anyone. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just watching something private. It wasn't unusual, and I trusted him. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps descending the stairs. My husband appeared at the bottom, and the moment he saw me, his face drained of color. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room. He looked guilty. My stomach churned. Something wasn't right. Before I could say anything, another figure emerged. My brother-in-law, Justin. He greeted me stiffly, his tone unusually formal. His neck bore several unmistakable hickeys. My mind raced. Justin quickly mumbled something about needing to get home to his girlfriend and rushed out the door. Normally, my husband and Justin are inseparable, always hugging or joking around. But this time, there was no warmth, no farewell. Just cold silence. I turned to my husband, my voice trembling. What was that about? Nothing, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. When I pressed him, he claimed they'd had an argument. What kind of argument? I asked. He hesitated before blurting out, Justin cheated on his girlfriend, and the woman he brought over escaped through the window when she heard your car. His story sounded plausible enough, but something still felt off. Justin has his own place. Why would he bring someone here? And why would my husband be acting so nervous? That night, my husband retreated to his office, claiming he had work to finish. But even when he returned to bed, he seemed distant. Reserved. Normally, he'd be thrilled to have me back, showering me with affection. This time, there was nothing. Just a wall of silence. The unease gnawed at me. When he went to take a shower, I followed him to the bathroom to wash my face. That's when I saw them, hickeys, faint but undeniable, scattered across his chest. He quickly covered himself when he noticed me staring. My heart dropped. I felt like I was suffocating. Desperate for answers, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked his phone. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Messages. Between him and Justin. Explicit messages. I read in disbelief as the words painted a picture of a relationship far beyond brotherly affection. My hands trembled as reality crashed down on me. When my husband emerged from the shower, I confronted him. I showed him the messages and demanded an explanation. He looked panicked and tried to laugh it off. It's just a joke, he said weakly. Brothers being stupid. We mess around sometimes. But I wasn't buying it. The intimacy in those messages wasn't something you could dismiss as a joke. I went to bed that night, unable to speak. I felt like my entire world had crumbled. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of muffled sobs. I found my husband curled up on the couch, tears streaming down his face. My heart ached, despite everything. I sat beside him and asked softly, "What's going on? Please, just tell me the truth." And he did. Through choked sobs, he confessed everything. It started over 10 years ago, long before we met. Growing up in a strict, religious household, he and Justin had no understanding of relationships or dating. Their curiosity turned into something more, something they couldn't explain. What began as experimentation escalated into a full-blown relationship. They had tried to stop, he said. They'd gone months, even years, without crossing the line. But they always came back to each other. He told me he'd hoped marriage would change things, that being with me would give him the strength to leave that part of his past behind. But it hadn't. And now, here we were. I sat in silence, the weight of his confession crushing me. My mind raced with questions, but none of them seemed to matter in that moment. All I could feel was heartbreak, for him, for me, for the tangled mess of love and pain we had built our lives upon. Love, trust, and betrayal. They're threads in the fabric of human relationships, each one fragile and easily torn. What do you do when the person you thought you knew reveals a side you never imagined? Can love survive the weight of such secrets? Or does it crumble under the truth? I sat there, stunned into silence, as his words lingered in the air. My husband, the man I trusted with my heart, had just confessed to something that felt too big, too overwhelming for me to process. His face was a canvas of regret, tears streaming freely as he tried to explain himself. I didn't know how to stop it, he said, his voice trembling. It wasn't about love or desire. It was about shame, control, and this broken part of me that I didn't know how to fix. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers to questions I couldn't even form. But all I could do was sit there, my hands trembling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. "How long?" I finally whispered. He looked away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his confession. "It started when we were teenagers," he said. "We didn't know any better. Our parents, they were so strict, so judgmental. We didn't have anyone to talk to guide us. It just happened." "And now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "It's been off and on for years," he admitted. "But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I've always loved you. This isn't about you. It's about me, and all the things I buried for so long." His words hit me like a tidal wave. How could I reconcile the man I knew, the man I married, with this version of him, tangled in a secret so dark and painful it felt like it belonged to someone else? The days that followed were a blur. I vacillated between anger, heartbreak, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I didn't know who to talk to or how to even begin unpacking the layers of pain and confusion. Justin reached out to me, too. His message was brief, apologetic. "I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for you to find out like this. I'll keep my distance." I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? My husband and I barely spoke. When we did, it was tense, clipped, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between us. He begged me to go to therapy with him, to work through this together. But I wasn't ready. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel, I asked myself the hardest question of all: could I forgive him? Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing what had happened. But could I find a way to understand, to empathize, to move forward? Eventually, I agreed to therapy, not for him, but for myself. I needed to make sense of my own feelings, to figure out what I wanted and whether our marriage could survive this. The sessions were painful, raw, but also illuminating. I began to understand the depth of his trauma, the way his upbringing had shaped him, broken him in ways he was still struggling to mend. I also had to confront my own pain, my own sense of betrayal. It wasn't just about the infidelity, it was about the years of secrecy, the lies, the version of our life together that I thought was real but wasn't. Justin, too, sought therapy. He reached out to apologize again, this time more sincerely, explaining that he was trying to confront his own demons. I didn't know if I could ever face him again, but I appreciated the effort. Months have passed, and the journey is far from over. My husband and I are still in therapy, working through the layers of hurt and mistrust. Some days, it feels impossible. Other days, there's a glimmer of hope, a shared laugh, a moment of connection that reminds me of why I fell in love with him in the first place. But the truth is, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if our marriage will survive this. What I do know is that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can face even the darkest truths and come out the other side. This isn't the life I envisioned, but it's the life I have. And maybe, just maybe, there's a way to build something new from the ashes. Secrets can break us, but they can also force us to confront the truths we've been too afraid to face. This story isn't about closure or resolution, it's about the messy, complicated process of healing. Because sometimes, the only way out is through. As time passed, the weight of everything began to settle. The whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, grief, slowly gave way to quieter, more introspective moments. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where I could unravel the tangled threads of my emotions and begin to make sense of what had happened. In one session, my therapist asked me a question that struck me deeply: what do you want, not for your marriage, but for yourself? It was a question I hadn't considered. So much of my focus had been on what this meant for us, for our relationship. But what about me? I realized I had been so consumed by the betrayal that I hadn't stopped to think about my own needs, my own healing. I began journaling, pouring out my thoughts and emotions onto the page. I wrote about the love we shared, the dreams we built together, and the shattering pain of discovering the truth. But I also wrote about my strength. I wrote about the times I had overcome challenges, the resilience I found in myself even when life felt impossible. Slowly, I began to see myself not just as someone who had been hurt, but as someone capable of healing. It took weeks before I felt ready to speak to Justin. My husband had urged me not to, worried it would reopen wounds that were barely beginning to heal. But I needed closure. When we finally met, it was in a neutral place, a quiet park where we could talk without interruptions. Justin looked different, older somehow, as though the weight of his guilt had aged him. "I don't even know where to start," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start with the truth," I replied. He took a deep breath and began to share his side of the story. How their upbringing had left them both confused and isolated, how their relationship had been a twisted mix of shame and comfort. He spoke of his own struggles, his regrets, and his hope that someday he could find forgiveness, not just from me, but from himself. By the end of our conversation, I didn't feel forgiveness, not yet. But I felt something else, understanding. It didn't excuse what had happened, but it gave me a clearer picture of the pain and confusion that had led to this moment. Back at home, my husband and I continued to navigate the fragile path forward. Therapy helped us have the difficult conversations we had avoided for so long, about trust, boundaries, and the lingering shadows of his past. We set new rules for our relationship, rules that prioritized honesty and transparency above all else. But we also acknowledged that healing would take time, and that it was okay to move at our own pace. Some days were better than others. There were moments when I felt a glimmer of hope, when I could see the man I fell in love with beneath the layers of guilt and regret. But there were also days when the pain felt too raw, too overwhelming. One night, as we sat together on the couch, my husband turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "But I want you to know how much I love you. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right, if you'll let me." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, and it wasn't the marriage I thought I had. But it was real, raw, and imperfect. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. Life doesn't come with guarantees. Love, trust, and happiness, they're all fragile, all vulnerable to the unexpected. But even in the darkest moments, there's a chance for growth, for healing, for something new. This is my story, not one of closure, but of courage. Of finding the strength to face the truth, and the hope to rebuild, one step at a time.